This is a non-monetized video. I'm claiming fair use by the Federal Act. This video is in direct response to Hythlo Day, but I certainly invite anyone else interested to comment or respond. And that includes Logic Only Zone, even though I don't like a lot of the things you do. I invite you to participate in the conversation regardless. Okay. So, there are these two fishies, and they are out swimming in the ocean, these two guys right here, little fishies. And because this is a story, they were talking to each other about fishy stuff. They're like, hey, fishy, 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 fishy. You know, sure is a nice day, that kind of thing. When a bigger, older fish, he swims by. And being a joker, he's like, morning, boys. How's the water? And he swims away. And the two fishies kind of look at each other kind of confused like. And then one of them finally says to each other, what's water? So the point of this story is that we often miss the world around us because we're in it. And the way that implies is, you know, we assign characteristics to things so often that often we think that the things have the characteristic. Also because there's so much contradiction, is my claim, is my argument, in the world that we often don't even see it, or that seems to be the case. So, I thought they asked me a couple questions about abstracts and non-physical existence, right? So, ideas exist, words exist, and this will be supported later. Now, ideas can be true, false, neither or both, you know, assign truth values to ideas. Statements made out of words can also be true, false, neither or both. We can assign truth values to statements. That's kind of what logic is. Now, again, I don't have a definition of truth. I told my story before about how I asked the philosophy professor in the symbolic logic class what truth is, and I didn't get an answer, right? I haven't gotten a good answer to this question of what is the definition of truth. And I'm not looking for a general definition. I'm looking for necessary and sufficient conditions so that we can exactly know, or at least as close to this as reasonably possible. Now, the law of non-contradiction and the logical absolutes, of which law of non-contradiction is one of the logical absolutes, but I'll be focusing on this one more specifically. It exists as an idea, but it is false. Let's talk about let's talk about what contradiction is and paradox. I thought I kind of said, let's treat these as the same thing, and I've been doing that. I kind of use the terms interchangeably, but technically there is a difference. Non-contradiction, or a contradiction, I'm sorry, is symbolized A and not A. Paradox is symbolized A is necessary and A is not possible. But they are very similar, such that I often get the terms mixed up myself, and so I'm certainly not going to. I will agree with Hythlo Day that we can use these interchangeably. I will agree to that. So, you know, if I get a little caught up in my words in this video, we are talking about foundations of logic and foundations of reasoning. So I might get a little, I have to stop and pause and think a little bit from time to time, so forgive me for that. So, I today posted these Matt Dillahunty videos to give us some terminology to talk about and some ideas. Now, again, I'm going to say Matt Dillahunty is a charlatan. Either he's you know, saying how great logic is when he doesn't know what it is, or he's just flat out dishonest. It was pretty apparent in the video. The video was he was arguing with someone that had a proof. And Matt Dillahunty's main argument against the proof was that it changed scope, which is what we do in predicate logic, right? It makes me wonder, does Matt Dillahunty know what predicate logic is? Is he just naive, or is he dishonest? You know, predicate logic is going from a statement like there exists a thing to they're all the things, from a specific claim to a universal claim, or from a universal claim to a specific claim, and there's rules on how to do it. I don't think the rules are very good. I don't think they work, but you can't say that the proof is illogical if it, you know, follows the rules of predicate logic. And he also, Matt Dillahunty, makes a logical fallacy in this this video when he's talking about there exists a rock such that the rock is not what it is not, right? The rock is not contradictory, and it doesn't matter if there's a person in the universe, then that rock is not contradictory. Now, unless you do it a specific way through generalization, right, then you can't say then, because there's a specific case of non-contradiction, that non-contradiction is a universal law. That's a fallacy, right? And in this case, it's maybe even paradoxical, right? Right? To be able to go from an existence case to a universal case, we need to generalize, show that that existence is generalizable to all cases. To do that, we need logic, and to have logic, we need that non-contradiction rule, right? So he's in big trouble. Now, to counter this universal claim of non-contradiction, I only need one example, right? And I've been showing a lot of examples, right? But it seems that Hythode, I guess, in particular, kind of maybe he knows something I don't, or maybe he's just dismissing evidence. I don't want to, you know, point the finger at him too much, but it just seems like I keep bringing up all these examples, and then his last video he's like accuses me of not bringing up examples. So I'm wondering if he's blocking. I'm just asking the question if maybe he's blocking. One thing to mention here, right? This is the wrong place to mention. I'll have to come back to this later. But so I only need one example, and we've had a bunch. I'm going to have 3 categories of contradictions. So the first category is physical. These are physical contradictions. Now we can talk about quantum mechanics, right? Now, we don't know for sure that quantum mechanics is right. There's a lot of uncertainty there. But if you want to talk about the things going on in quantum mechanics, then you have to be able to talk about particles being point-like and wave-like at the same time. I have to talk about Bose-Einstein condensates, where one particle can be in many places at the same time, and talk about entanglement, how things, there's wacky stuff, it seems, in quantum mechanics. Now, I don't know for sure, so that's one thing, but if you want to talk about quantum mechanics in the current conversation, then you have to address these things. There's colors we talked about. Now, this might belong in the reason category, right? If you're talking about the physical category, there's also a reason category. I could make a whole video about colors, and I don't want to go into all now because they're very, the problems with the colors are very similar to this coffee cup that Ani Kantavad brought up, right? Where the coffee is bittersweet. It's bitter and sweet, where bitter and sweet are opposites. So this is like saying I can be taller than something and shorter than something at the same time. It's not exactly that, because this is possible. Bittersweet is possible, and taller and shorter is not possible. But if we took that, we put in a lot of sugar, make sure that that coffee is nice and sweet, and you barely see the bitterness on it, and then add 2 drops of Hot Mama's Jemima hot sauce, and this sauce is so powerful that you wouldn't call it sweet anymore. So it still has all that same sugar in it. It still has all that same sweetness in it, but somehow that sweetness is lost. It's sweet and it's not sweet. There's the Big Bang, right? So the Big Bang could be something from nothing, right? That's a contradiction. It could be that it always existed, which I think is contradictory as well. That it exists, but it had no beginning. I think there's some problems there. And then we can talk about Glenda Tuskin's Mexican hat. We're saying it takes less energy to have some energy. It would take more energy to have no energy. I think there's some contradiction in that as well. I mean, again, it's that kind of quantum stuff, we're not sure. But, any of these 3 ways for the universe to exist, I think, that regardless of which one you pick, now they might all be wrong, right? But that the existence of the universe is somewhat contradictory. As far as we can tell, like, physical stuff is a bit harder and aren't as prevalent as like the social stuff, right? I've mentioned, people that want objectivity or they want altruism, when things like objectivity and altruism need to be emotionless actions such that you can't want them, but people do anyway. I talked about different responses to functionally equivalent games. That was an interesting one. There's all kinds of like little catch-22s, like we have a military to keep the peace, but violence always escalates, right? So it's just going to lose. In the previous video, I talked about how money printing can lead to an increase in inflation or a decrease in inflation, or both, and create ambiguous effects. There's all kinds of social stuff. But what Hyde Today, I think, wants to really get into is the contradictions in reasoning itself. So we can talk about that the truth value of a statement in sentential logic is not the same as the truth value of the statement when it is analyzed with fuzzy logic. I talked about that in one of my Inventive BS videos. I've talked about how it's really necessary that we have some system where we can try and find out the truth and also sort good arguments from bad arguments. But I've kind of shown this is impossible. We can't get a good rule, and then piling up rules on top of the rules just makes it worse. That was my How to Logic and Why Not video, which I'll talk about now, right? That video was about how logic works and about how logic does not work. It was both in one video. That video was a contradiction. We talked about Russell and Gödel, about the self-referential sets, and the liar's paradox. This statement is a lie. There, I just did paradox. Now, this has been excluded by the deniers. They're like, psh, well, we can't have any contradictions because then that would violate the rule of non-contradiction. So let's just say that you can't do self-referentialism, and they'll just avoid it by ignoring its existence. Now, there's another big problem with different kinds of truths, right? There's subjective truths, there's absolute truths, there's arbitrary truths, and sometimes these things overlap on the same statement. I didn't write down an example, but there are different kinds of truths, right? Like an arbitrary truth would be, my name is Inventive Harvest. Why? Because I declare it to be that way, and people have called me that. I have another name on my birth certificate. Why is that my name? Because my mom arbitrarily decided that that was going to be my name. Absolute truths are often very simple kind of tautology kind of things, like I can't be taller than something and shorter than something at the same time. Subjective truths are very prevalent all over the place. So my pillow, if I rest my head upon my pillow, it is a pillow. If I rest my pillow upon my head, it is a hat and not a pillow. It's this assignment thing, of assigning characteristics to stuff. It's us that's doing it. Now, also in this video, we're talking about the existence of non-physical stuff, like ideas. So it exists, but it's not a thing. This is why I don't have problems with contradiction, like kind of start from contradiction. Oh, and this is one I added on when I was watching the Matt Dillahunty video, right, where he was saying, I know what the law of contradiction is not. It's not what it is not, right? So he's doing self-referentialism. He says the logical absolutes apply to themselves, right? Which is what we said you can't do with Russell and Gödel, right? But more to the point, right? Non-contradiction is not what it's not would kind of imply that it's not everything. That's pretty weak, but it was just an idea I had while I was watching the Matt Dillahunty thing. Okay, so let's talk about assigning stuff. I'm going to talk about two-ness first, and then this will be about the number 2. And these are different concepts. But so here we've got 4 dice, okay? One of these dice I'm going to put on the floor. 1 dice I'll put on the table, and 2 dice I'll put on the paper that's on the table, right? So these dice here, I'm saying, are both on the paper and on the table, right? So how many dice are there in the universe of this video? That's 4. How many dice are on the table? That's 3. How many dice are on the paper? 2. Are on the paper. There's 2. How many dice are on the table but not on the paper is 1. So that's what I'm talking about grouping. They only have 2-ness when we arrange them in such a way such that we're saying it's these ones, or it's these ones, and you know, if we're saying it's these ones, then it's 2-ness. But we're doing that. Now, I can't explain it any better than that unless someone challenges me in some specific way or something. But now there's the number 2, which is a total abstraction, right? Here's where the number 2 comes up, right? If I have 4 things and I divide it by 2, I get 2 things, right? Because the 4 and the 2 cancel. You know, so if I get 4 dice and divide it in half, then I get 2 dice. If I've got 4 dice and I divide that by 2 dice, then the 4 and the 2 cancels, and the dice cancels, and I get the number 2, right? So the number 2 is not relating to things. It's a thing in and of itself. Two exists as an idea, but it does not exist physically anywhere in the universe, right? Show me a two, right? And not the symbol that represents two. I want you to show me a two in the universe, and not two things, just a two, right? It's not a physical thing. It's just an idea. It exists as an idea. So abstract exists, but it's not the same thing as transcendence. Transcendence also exists as an idea, but it's false. Just because something is abstract does not mean it's transcendent, right? So here, I'm going to talk about this part that I skipped over before. So the concept of vampire is abstract, but we wouldn't say that everything is vampire, right? So let's talk about abstraction, and this part's going to be really cool. So here's my book, Understanding Comics. As you can see, this is a well-loved book. So he explains things just so well. So he wants to do a definition of what is comics. Like, this is Understanding Comics. And he starts with Will Eisner's definition of comics is sequential art. But he says, let's see if we can expand it to a proper, like, dictionary-style definition, or maybe, I would say, list of necessary and specific conditions, such that it is a comic, and things that are not comics are not included. And so one guy says, he's kind of talking to this pretend audience here, right? One guy says, there are different kinds of art. How about something a little bit more specific than just art? And he says, how's this? Sequential visual art. And this kind of Bugs Bunny looking guy right here says, hey, what about animation? And he's like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, well, isn't animated film just visual art in sequence? Right? When he starts talking about movies, right? However, you might say that before it's projected, film is just a very, 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 very slow comic. But to deal with the problem, we're going to be a bit more specific. And he puts in the word juxtaposed sequential visual art, which I think he fails. Like, there's juxtaposition in film, but that's beside the point. And then he says, well, why does that say art? Doesn't that imply some sort of value judgment, right? Is it, is it art or is it not art? Is it cultural? So he then changes it. Okay, how about this? Juxtapose sequential static images. And someone says, well, now that sounds arbitrary. So he puts in the word deliberate to counter the arbitrary. So now we've got juxtapose static images in deliberate sequence. And someone says, well, what about words? And he's like, oh, it doesn't have to have words. There's plenty of comics without words. He's like, no. I mean, this definition, it describes words. It's like, what? Well, letters are static images, right? When they're arranged in a deliberate sequence, placed next to one each other, we call them words. So then words fit this definition of juxtaposed sequential static images in deliberate sequence. So then he's like, okay, how does this sound? Juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence. And that's kind of what they end up with. And one guy says, well, what about Batman? Shouldn't the definition of comics have Batman in it? That's a joke. But see, okay, so this definition is pretty specific, but when I look at that, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, that's comics, right? Where this general definition of sequential art, wherever that, sequential art, that is, that's something I can grasp onto and say that's comics. So this will make sense as far as the abstraction of words as we go on. However much when we try and understand what comics is, part of that world will always lie in shadow and mystery. I'll do my best in the following chapters to shed light on that unseen side, but as we focus on the world of comics as it is, it should be kept in mind that this world is only one of many possible worlds. Our attempts to define comics are an ongoing process which won't end anytime soon. A new generation will no doubt reject whatever this one finally decides to accept and try once more to reinvent comics. And so they should. Here's to the great debate. Okay, so now it's starting to come together. He says, here's a painting by Magritte called The Treachery of Images. And it's this pipe, but underneath the pipe it says in French, this is not a pipe. The transcription in French means this is not a pipe. And indeed, it is not a pipe. It is a painting of a pipe, right? Abstraction. Right? It's a painting of a pipe? No. It's not. It's a drawing of a painting of a pipe. Well, no, wrong again. It's a printed copy of a drawing of a painting of a pipe. 10 copies, actually. 6 if you, fold the pages back. And he sits there quietly. So, this is not a man, this is not a country, this is not a leaf, these are not people, and these are not ideas. So, there's some abstraction, right? Where we've got a picture of a guy, it's an abstraction of a guy, but it's very similar to what the guy might actually look like. And then this is a bit more cartoony, what you might see in a semi-realistic comic. This is more like a Marvel comic kind of thing. This is like an Archie Comics kind of guy. And there's a stick figure face. And so he's going, this one, these are all abstractions of the guy, but this one is more abstract than this one. However, when we look at this guy, this is a kind of a side point. When we look at this guy here, we see that as an other. This guy right there. We see him as an other. This guy too, we kind of see him as an other. But this guy here, we see that as ourselves. Because we're egotistical and we see ourselves in everything, right? But that's not the only abstraction. We're only getting halfway there. There's a further abstraction where the meaning is retained, but the resemblance to the thing is gone. And this is words. Words are the ultimate abstraction. Yeah. So, here we go. So here's our kind of thing again, right? We're going from less abstract to more abstract. And then here we're going from more abstract to less abstract, right? So face is the most abstract you can get for words of describing this thing. Then we can get more less abstract and say 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, and get less abstract than that. The youth's proud livery so gazed on now. That's pretty abstract, right? I don't know if this is more abstract than this is I don't know. But moving on. I don't want to talk about that. Go way to the back here. Okay. So, what is the process of abstraction? So, it's basically what happens when we're past survival, right? Here's this guy, he's getting chased down by this tiger, he's a caveman kind of guy. And he's like, oh, tiger's coming at me, right? So he sees a chance, he grabs the branch and he swings up, the tiger misses him, right? and he survives. So his survival is not in question, in immediate question anymore. And so maybe he'll go look for food, maybe some female reproduction, this kind of stuff. But instead, he's like, forget you, tiger. And that is art. That is abstraction. This. Okay. So here we're going from idea to form to idiom to structure to craft to surface, right? The comic book physically exists. The idea does not physically exist, but we know that the idea exists because the comic book exists. And the comic book was, at least presumably or something, based on an idea, right? Superman is about having powers. It's about being an immigrant. It's based on an idea, and it's a way of expressing that idea. And the comic book physically exists. The idea exists as an idea. So that's what abstraction is, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, what was the word, vampire or something, that transcendence exists. It's just abstraction. I think I covered it in half an hour. That's great. So I hope that answers your questions. High Flow Day. And I certainly welcome feedback from anybody. So again, thanks for your time.